Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Syrian army is too weak to challenge the SDF directly right now. The SDF has at least 50,000 well-trained fighters. Another factor that Turkey has to consider is the ongoing peace process at home with PKK, which is aimed at full disbandment of the PKK and of this armed conflict which has been going on for decades. So a potential military operation could disrupt that process too, because the PKK and the SDF are closely linked. So an attack could provoke a backlash not just in Syria but also among Kurdish communities in Turkey.
Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. Turkey and Syria signed a long-anticipated military cooperation agreement on Wednesday during Turkish Defense Minister Yasar Guler's visit to Damascus, in the latest sign of Turkey's deepening relationship with the new Syrian government. Syrian state media reported that the deal stipulates an exchange of military personnel for specialized training, technical assistance, and programs in areas like counterterrorism, mine clearance, cyber defense, engineering, logistics, and peacekeeping. It further aims to develop the capabilities and infrastructure of the Syrian Arab Army. The timing of the deal is important, as it comes as Turkey escalates its rhetoric against the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. The SDF, which operates with considerable autonomy in the northeast, signed a deal with the transitional government back in March to integrate into the new state's forces. But the implementation has been complicated by sectarian conflict in the country, most recently between Bedouin/government forces and Druze groups in the south. Turkey considers the SDF a Syrian branch of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, militant group that is engaging in dialogue of its own with Ankara after decades of armed struggle. As such, Turkey would like to see the SDF integrate into the forces of the friendly government in Damascus. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said on Wednesday that Israel is seeking to turn Syria's Kurds into a, quote, pawn. Damascus is also angry with the SDF over a recent conference in the northeast in which minority groups called for a new constitution, and clashes broke out between the SDF and local groups in the northeast region of Deir ez-Zor this week. For its part, Israel lacks any formal relations with the SDF, but has struck Syrian forces numerous times this year, most recently in defense of Druze in the south. Israel is wary of the growing Turkish entrenchment in Syria and considers the potential Turkish presence at the T4 base in Palmyra a red line. In this episode, we hear from Al Monitor's correspondent in Ankara, Ezgi Akin. Ezgi takes us through the strategic interests driving Turkey's engagement in Syria, whether there will be renewed violence between Turkey and the SDF, and how Ankara views Israel's actions in the country. Hope you enjoy. Ezgi, welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Ezgi, first question is a basic one. Why did Turkey want this deal with the Syrian government?
Well, Adam, perhaps a better phrasing can be Turkey sees it as a necessity. Turkey's motivation is pretty straightforward. It's national security. Ankara sees Syria's territorial integrity and stability as vital for its own national security. And a renewed conflict in Syria first can trigger a new refugee wave. And second, and more importantly, actually, instability in Syria could embolden the Syrian Democratic Forces, a franchise of the PKK, a Kurdish group that has been waging an armed campaign against Turkey for decades. So, in Turkey's rationale, Syria needs a regular army capable to thwart any threat to its national territorial integrity and stability.
And Ezgi, how might the deal bolster Turkey's presence within Syria? And what can we expect in terms of specific terms of this agreement?
The primary goal of the cooperation, at least in the initial phase, will be to build a regular army. And that requires a lot of training and joint training sessions between Turkey and Syria. So, more Turkish deployment is possible for training purposes. And actually, in April, a Turkish Defense Ministry official said negotiations with Damascus were underway for Turkish troop deployment in a military base in Syria for training purposes. Turkey already has about 10,000 troops in northern Syria, mostly deployed around the northern border. But this agreement could allow Turkey to extend its presence further south, like in Palmyra, like in Homs, to more central Syria. Beyond the physical presence, the deal will also making Turkey's role in training and equipping Syrian government forces official, including for counterterrorism operations against groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda offshoots in Syria. By the way, some observers also believe that the deal signals a potential joint military operation against the SDF too.
And Ezgi, on that note of the Syrian Democratic Forces, what is Turkey saying about the recent tensions between the SDF and Damascus? And do you think that a new conflict in Syria between the SDF and the government is inevitable?
In addition to Damascus SDF tensions, Turkey also has been ramping up its threat against the SDF to disarm and to integrate into the Syrian army. SDF in turn expresses concern that the loss of autonomy would leave the group open to attacks from Islamist groups and violent clashes in Suwaida between Bedouin tribes and Druze minority also provided an example for them that emboldened their concerns. Fidan this week called the Syrian Kurds Israeli pawns and warned that any attempt by the SDF to divide Syria is a national security threat for Turkey. But the reality on the ground is more complicated. There are a lot of factors to consider. First of all, the situation of the Syrian army. Syrian army is too weak to challenge the SDF directly right now. The SDF has at least 50,000 well-trained fighters. Another factor that Turkey has to consider is the ongoing peace process at home with PKK, which is aimed at full disbandment of the PKK and of this armed conflict which has been going on for decades. So a potential military operation could disrupt that process too, because the PKK and the SDF are closely linked. So an attack could provoke a backlash not just in Syria but also among Kurdish communities in Turkey. That said, Adam, in the past, defying calls from international community, particularly from Pentagon, the top ally of the SDF against the Islamic State in Syria, Turkey has conducted several military operations against the Kurdish-led group until 2020. And as a result of those operations, it was slapped with a series of arms embargoes from Western powers. So I can say that Ankara has to take into account several factors before launching a limited operation against the Kurdish-led group.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with Ezgi Akin after this short break.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al-Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al-Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25 for a discount.
Okay, we're back. Ezgi, we'll conclude with the Israel factor, something you alluded to earlier. Obviously, Turkey-Israel relations are at a low over the Gaza war, but how does Turkey view Israeli concerns about the Turkish military presence in Syria?
Adam, before explaining the Turkey's position, let me briefly sum up Israeli concerns there. The Jewish state is wary of Syrian President Shara's Islamist credentials, and it believes that a growing security ties between Ankara and Damascus can potentially pose a national security threat to itself. You already mentioned the state of the Turkey-Israeli relations. Thus, Israeli officials back in April said Turkish troop deployment in southern Syria as a red line. Turkey, in turn, has been pushing a narrative that a stable Syria under Shara administration, which will emerge as a result of strong Turkish-Syrian military cooperation, will be more in line with Israeli interests, citing it will prevent Iran to regain influence in the country. Though, if Turkey wants its military cooperation with Syria to be successful, it has to keep in mind Israeli concerns, in my opinion, because, as you know, also, Israel has already carried out hundreds of airstrikes against the Syrian military sites, and there's no reason to think it will stop if it felt threatened again. So both Ankara and Damascus have a strong incentive to avoid taking any steps in their cooperation that could provoke Israel. So I can say that there will be a careful balance behind the scenes.
Ezgi, thanks a lot for your time, and we look forward to more of your reporting and analyses from Ankara on this topic.
Thank you, Adam. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.